morning, everybody, and welcome to week 2 of our virtual Rules of Golf series. For those of you that were able to join us last week, welcome back. We're glad that you are back with us this morning. And for any new attendees out there, welcome. And we're glad that you can make it. We're glad that you are a part of our series. And as I mentioned last week, this is something that is brand new to us as far as doing this virtual series and as a 4-week thing where we go over many different rules and not just our standard 1-hour session. So we welcome any feedback, as I mentioned last week, from anyone on what we can do better to improve this presentation in this series, because this is something based on the attendance so far that we think will be a success and something that we will continue to do. So I will be your presenter today, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh Coates. I am the Director of Championships and Golf Operations with the VSGA, and this morning I will be joined by Amanda Kelly, who is the Manager of Championships and Golf Operations, and I will be presenting. She will be handling our questions for this morning. And on that note, on questions, we certainly encourage any questions that you have. Well, we want this to be something that is very beneficial to you. And if you have any questions that you came in with, or as the presentation goes on, please send those questions in using the chat feature, because we do want this to be something that is very beneficial to everyone. For those that may have been joining us for the first time and that don't know too much about what we're trying to do here, we do encourage everybody to visit the USGA's website and enroll in their Rules 101 class to self-educate, and these presentations are more of a review and a chance for some feedback and some questions to be answered. So please keep the questions very basic. If you do have an in-depth question, we are in the office right now. You could certainly call us after the presentation is over, or if you'd like to submit it through the website. If you go to our website, vsga.org, if you go to Learn and then Contact Us, at the bottom of that screen, there is a section dedicated to just the rules of golf where you can send a question in. It comes right to our emails, and we'll do our best to answer it as promptly as possible. But we're going to stick to the questions that are just based on these topics. As we go through, it'll be very easy to get off topic because we are going to cover a lot this morning and kind of step into lots of different rules. But keep in mind that starting next week, we're going to get into our relief procedures. So applying what we've learned so far and what we're going to learn today to taking relief, starting with free relief next week and then penalty relief the week following. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into our presentation this morning. Here's our agenda today. So we're going to talk about playing the course as you find it, ball handling, and playing the ball as it lies. So covering rules 2, 8, 14, and 9. However, I'm going to note throughout the presentation several other rules that we are going to step into and talk about briefly, so we can try to cover as much as possible. So going into the areas of the golf course, so we can't play the course as we find it unless we know the areas of the golf course. And it's important to know each of the 5 areas of the golf course. We can put a little asterisk next to a 6th area, which is out of bounds. Although not technically part of the golf course, it is an area that we do define. It's the committee's responsible, the golf course is responsible to define the areas of the golf course, and out of bounds is not one of the ones that is listed in the 5 defined areas, but we do have to define it because we need to know if we're on the course or off the course. So you can add in out of bounds here with an asterisk next to it, and we'll talk about that more on the next slide. But here are 5 areas of the golf course. So we have the teeing area, bunkers, penalty areas, the putting green, and then if your ball is not on any of these 4 that I just listed, teeing area, bunkers, penalty areas, and putting green, your ball is considered in the general area. So that is, by the words, very general. It can include fairway, it can include rough, it can include trees, it can include areas of tall grass that may not be defined as penalty areas. So if you're not in one of the 4 specific areas of the golf course, you are in the general area. And one other thing I'll note before going to the next slide is that when we talk about the teeing area and the putting green, we're talking about of the hole being played for both of those. So there's only one teeing area, only one putting green on that specific hole. If you happen to hit your ball onto another teeing area or another putting green of a different hole, because there's only one, your ball is considered in the general area in those cases, and then those the rules that apply to the general area would take care of that. If your ball goes onto another putting green, you are considered to be on a wrong putting green, even though it's in the general area. The rules are going to make you take relief from that wrong putting green. So here's another slide. There's lots of words on the next two slides. So for those of you who are tech savvy, I'd recommend taking a screenshot on your computer or however you're viewing, or take a picture with your smartphone if you want to come back and review. And we are making plans to have these slides available either series by series or week by week, or we might combine all of them and create a PDF to put on our website. So there will be an opportunity to revisit this either by the recorded version or a slide deck that we will produce and make available on our website at the conclusion. But going through each of the areas of the golf course, and we need to know how they're defined and the edges, whether they go up or down, and then that would then tell us when our ball is in one of these areas. So starting with the teeing area, it is outside in the front edge of the tee markers and goes back 2 club lengths. And I'll mention right now, because we're going to hear this several times in the next couple of weeks about what a club length is. So that's a definition, and it is the longest club in your bag that is not a putter. So for more times than not, that's going to be our driver. So whenever we talk about club lengths, that is the longest club in your bag that's not a putter. The imaginary edge of this area goes upwards. So naturally, because we are teeing the ball up in the teeing area, the edge goes up, and then if any part of the ball touches that area, so it's a very specific area, it's a rectangular area between 2 tee markers going 2 club lengths back, so it's not the entire tee box, tee deck, or whatever you might call it, it's that rectangular area. And if any part of the ball touches it, then you are in. So if your ball is on the very front edge of the teeing area, and 95% of the ball is outside or in front of the tee markers, but just 5% is inside touching it, your ball is considered in the teeing area and you're good to go there. So a little bit differently, moving on to the putting green. It is a surface that is specially prepared for putting. There is no imaginary edge because the ball has to physically touch the putting green in order to be on it. So no imaginary edge there. And same thing with bunkers. It's a specially prepared area with sand in it. So it's the area that is on purpose dug out and to include sand. And if any part of the ball touches where the sand is or where the sand would be, so in cases of heavy rain, we have washouts where it's clear that the sand is intended to be there, but it's washed out, our ball is considered to be in that bunker, and then bunker rules would apply. So same thing on the imaginary edge, nothing there because the ball has to physically touch the bunker or the sand to be in the bunker. So going to a little bit different, where we do have an imaginary edge that does go up and down. So to establish where that edge is, we're going to use the outside edge of stakes or lines. That's the most common way that we define penalty areas. Sometimes we use other physical features, which could be the edge of tall grass. If it's clearly defined, we can use that. We have done it rarely in cases where it's very obvious and there can be little to no error or confusion there. But when we set up golf courses, we use stakes and painted lines. So the outside edge or the edge closest to the general area defines that area. The imaginary edge does go up and down. So up is pretty obvious if a ball is lodged in a tree or a bush or in some tall grass and we need to know where the golf ball is, that imaginary edge does go up. You might be asking, why does it go down? Because we might have a burrowing animal or something that has created a hole that might go under our line, but we still need to know where that ball is. So that's why the imaginary edge goes up and down. And if any part of the ball touches the penalty area, our ball is deemed to be in the penalty area, and we can play the ball as it lies, or if we want to take relief, we have to use the penalty area rule. For the general area, if my ball is not in any of the 4 specific areas of the golf course, then it is considered in the general area. So one note I will make for general area, when we talk about relief areas and taking relief later, because I mentioned that the general area could include rough, fairway, anything that's not one of those 4 other special areas or specific areas of the golf course, just keep that in mind when we say you have to drop the ball in the general area. It doesn't differentiate fairway to rough. So sometimes you might be taking relief from a sprinkler head and your ball's in the rough. The rule is going to be later covered, but it's going to say you have to drop the ball in the general area. Well, if your relief area, which we're going to cover today, spans into the fairway, you're still in the general area, so you can know the rule and use it to your advantage and drop the ball from the rough to the fairway because it's all considered general area. There are some local rules that specify general area and fairway height or less. We use that most commonly when we have to use lift, clean, and place for areas or conditions that are not favorable to playing it down. So keep in mind if there are any local rules or any rules that specify fairway height or less, those are a couple of exceptions to the general area, including everything and being able to use those rules. So if my ball is close to an out of bounds line, I need to know if it is in or out of bounds. We're going to use the course side edge of the stakes or lines. Most commonly we use white stakes or fence posts, but we also sometimes use painted white lines or other physical features like a building or a road, something like that, to define that edge. And that would be something that if you're setting up the golf course or you're playing in a tournament, you'd want to have the local rule sheet handy to know how those boundaries are defined. So we're looking at the course side edge of the stake. That imaginary edge does go up and down for the same reasons that we covered for the penalty area. And when no part of the ball touches the course, meaning the entire ball is outside of the course, that is when we are saying it's out of bounds. So kind of like the teeing area, if just a little part of that ball is on the golf course, it is still in bounds and you can certainly play it. So just a summary of when the ball is in or out, essentially the ball is going to be, if it's touching one of the smaller areas like the teeing area, the putting green, bunker, penalty area, and even when we're talking about general area versus out of bounds, it's going to be deemed to be in that smaller area when we're comparing the two. If your ball happens to be touching 2 of the specific parts of the golf course, this rarely happens, but the order is not in our favor of what we would like it to be. If let's say our ball is touching a penalty area and a bunker, the rules are putting the priority as your ball is touching the penalty area and not the bunker. So the order of priority is penalty area, bunker, and then putting green. So in order of least favorable to most favorable of that order of when our ball is touching 2 of the 4 specific areas of the golf course. So another slide that you may want to take a picture of, because there's a lot of words and there's a lot of rules that are being covered here. So we're talking about Rule 2, we're talking about the teeing area in Rule 6, we're talking about the putting green, Rule 13, bunkers, Rule 12, and penalty areas, Rule 17, as well as other rules such as when we have to take stroke and distance relief for out of bounds and so forth. So this slide really does touch on and cover a lot. So I'm going to summarize it without going through word for word. So when you're reading all these words, just take notes of these general statements. So talking about loose impediments, you can move loose impediments anywhere on the golf course. Taking relief from abnormal course conditions, you can do so everywhere except penalty areas. There are no relief from embedded balls in bunkers or penalty areas, so only in the general area or the rare case where we have it plugged in on the putting green or the teeing area. You can deem your ball unplayable anywhere except penalty areas. That's because penalty areas, that is a relief rule, and if your ball is in a penalty area, the rule says, or the rule book says, you have to go to that rule and only use that rule when taking relief. And something that comes up a lot of question about sand and loose soil. So you can only move sand and loose soil on the teeing area and the putting green. Sand and loose soil are not considered loose impediments. If you look in the definition of loose impediments, sand and loose soil are not in that definition. That's why in these rules it specifically mentions sand and soil for the teeing area and the putting green is being able to be moved. And everywhere else on the golf course, you cannot move or remove those two items. Penalty for accidental movement other than search. You do get a one-stroke penalty and have to replace the ball everywhere except for the putting green. So the putting green is one of the areas that is the most favorable areas. And if you do accidentally move your golf ball at rest, you would be able to put it back without penalty. And then also on the teeing area, if you accidentally move your ball, let's say you tee it up and you're getting set and you accidentally touch your ball with the club and it falls off, you're not going to get penalized because you don't have a ball in play yet, and you simply just re-tee it and move forward. So a couple things that I will mention with the specific areas of the golf course. So the teeing area being the most favorable, you are allowed to pretty much do anything you want to within the confines of that teeing area. So within that special or specific rectangular area, you are able to do lots of things: remove dew, frost, alter the surface and tee the ball, but it's only limited to that rectangular area. Everything outside of that rectangular area, now you are restricted to Rule 8, which we're going to cover next. You are restricted in what you can do and the things that are mentioned in Rule 8. So when we talk about altering the surface and removing things, it's only for that rectangular area. For the putting green, it's another area, obviously, where we're striving to hit our ball onto. It's one of the most favorable. You are allowed to mark and lift your ball at any time and as many times as you want, and always clean the ball. You can repair damage. The repairing damage part of that Rule 13 is limited to how I like to think of it is damage that can only have been done by a player or a group directly in front of you. So things like spike marks or footprints, like ball marks, things like that can be could be easily done by the group in front of you. Things that are not able to be repaired, or things that take either lots of time or cannot be done by the group in front of you, such as aeration holes. Well, the group in front's not putting aeration holes down. The maintenance crew's doing that. Other maintenance practices, also the natural wear and tear of a hole. So we're not talking about a ball mark or a ball that hits the hole and destroys the circumference of that hole, or somebody putting the flagstick back in the hole and taking a chunk out of the edge. So those are not what I would say natural wear and tear. But if the very first group in the morning is going to have a nice crisp edge on the hole, and the very last group on a busy day, that hole is going to be rounded or may have some natural wear, and you cannot repair that. On the putting green, you do get relief from abnormal course conditions on your line of play, which will be covered next week in free relief. But that is something very unique to the putting green by definition of the rule. Moving on to bunkers, we're not going to cover the Rule 12, which covers bunkers directly in our series, but just touching on a few things that you just need to remember, some common things. You may not touch ground with the club near the ball or with practice swings. So that part of the rule has carried over in the last few changes. So you cannot touch the sand with your club, either grounding it or taking practice swings or in your backswing. And you're also not allowed to test the condition of the bunker by any means. But some things that you are allowed to do in the bunker, one of them was a change, which I mentioned earlier, was you are allowed to move loose impediments. So that was a change in 2019, but still something that we do get questions on fairly often. You are allowed to move those loose impediments, but you are restricted in that you cannot move your ball, because anytime you move your ball, with those exceptions of the putting green and teeing area, you are going to get a penalty stroke and have to replace it. So that would apply here as well. You are allowed to bring clubs inside the bunker. You could bring just one extra club or bring your whole golf bag or any other equipment and set it down in the bunker. And I mentioned that you're not allowed to touch the sand with your club. However, in one of the exceptions, it does state that if you're just casually leaning on your club not doing anything to test the condition or anything that you shouldn't be doing other than just casually waiting for the group in front of you, or maybe you have to use your club to get in or out of the bunker because it's helpful that way. There's no problem there. And you also are allowed to dig in with your feet of what is reasonable in order to take a stance. So moving to out of bounds, obviously the least favorable. When taking relief from out of bounds, our only option there is to go back under stroke and distance because your ball is no longer on the course, and that is the way the rule is written. There is a new model local rule that was introduced in the last few years that has to be in writing or at least communicated, where you are allowed to, for a 2-stroke penalty, to take relief from out of bounds, not using the full stroke and distance option, but that is by local rule only. And any questions so far? Rule 8. So now that we know what the golf course is made up of, now we're going to talk about playing it as it is found and some of the things that we are limited to, and also some allowances there, some kind of, even though it's not stated as an exception, some built-in exceptions to the rule. So our first slide here is a definition, and Amanda mentioned this last week. I'll also mention it again. And you're going to see lots of definition slides. You're going to hear us talk about definitions and saying and teaching to the definitions. So I can't emphasize enough that if you're only going to read one section in the rules, to review those definitions because they're so important to know what each rule is talking about. And this one is one of the most important because without knowing what the conditions affecting the stroke are, we'll call them CATs for short. So without knowing that, in Rule 8, you're going to be totally lost because Rule 8 really centers on the conditions affecting the stroke. So you also notice that although the conditions affecting the stroke is a defined term, there are also 5 additional definitions built in. We'll go through each of them very basically. So the lie of the player's ball at rest, pretty self-explanatory there. The area of intended stance, so the picture there noting not only the player's feet, but also the body position. The area of intended swing, so there's that dotted line there that indicates it is the area that could be on the backswing as well as the follow through. So that entire arc, that is considered one of our conditions that we're going to see that we cannot improve. And also the relief area where the player will drop or place a ball. So in this case, the player is taking relief from a cart path. Again, we're going to talk about specific relief rules next week, but that defined area by the shaded white area and the dotted line around it, that is our relief area, and that is one of our sacred or protected areas under Rule 8 and the conditions affecting the stroke. So here we have another definition, and this is also important and something that we can highlight as one of the defined terms in the rules of golf that does not necessarily match up with the Webster's or dictionary version. So the definition of improve means to alter one of the conditions affecting the stroke or conditions affecting play, but the caveat, the next sentence is so that the player gains a potential advantage. So that's the key point there. So yes, we can have a literal improvement of a situation where yes, obviously we've done something to improve our line, but the next question is, have we gained a potential advantage? So an example for you would be if I am in the fairway and I'm 250 yards away from the hole and I'm going to be hitting a 3-wood. There's a divot that is 1 yard in front of my ball, and I repair that divot. So I completely smooth it over. It's on my line. So it's one of my conditions affecting the stroke, which the rule says I cannot improve. But now we have to, so obviously I've improved it, but now we have to ask, have I gained a potential advantage? Well, if I'm in the fairway and I'm making a full swing at a 3-wood, fixing a divot that's 1 yard in front of my ball is not going to give me a potential advantage. Ideally, I'm going to get it airborne and fly it well past that 1 yard. And if I don't, then things have gone seriously wrong, and I still have not gained a potential advantage for that stroke. So fast forward, let's say I do hit a pretty good 3-wood. I almost get it to the green, but I'm a couple yards short, and my ball's lying in the fairway, and I have nothing but fairway in front of me between my ball and the green. There's a divot 1 yard in front of my ball, and I'm going to putt the ball because I have a clear shot to the green using a putter. So my ball is going to stay on the ground and roll through that divot. And now I've repaired it. So the question or the answer completely changes, because now I've done the same exact thing I just did a few minutes ago in the fairway. But now, because the shot is totally different, I have gained a potential advantage, and I would incur the general penalty under Rule 8 for improving my line of play or one of the conditions affecting the stroke. That's going to be a general penalty, which in match play, I automatically lose the hole. In stroke play, I'm going to add 2 to my score. So just a quick example of how the definition in the rules of golf may or may not match the Webster's or dictionary version. Now that we know our conditions affecting the stroke, we know what improve means. Now Rule 8 is going to display some prohibited actions, and these are listed in the rule book in order, but we've broken them out into 2 categories of things that you cannot do, period. However, on the left side, these things are fixable, and on the right side, they are not fixable. So starting with the not fixable. So these are, as soon as you do this, it's a do not pass go, goes straight to the penalty box situation. Alter the surface of the ground, removing or pressing down sand or loose soil, and removing dew, frost, or water. Those are things that cannot be undone. You're automatically going to get that general penalty and play on. On the left side, these items are fixable. So right off the bat, the rules are going to say you get a general penalty. But however, if you are able to fix it, then you can escape that penalty. So if you move, bend, or break any fixed, natural, or artificial object, so it could be a tree limb, it could be an out-of-bounds stake. So that is the out-of-bounds stake is not a movable obstruction. That is a boundary object, which is something that is fixed or should or needs to stay exactly where it is. Also, the tee markers, when playing from that teeing area, those are deemed fixed. You cannot move those, but if you do happen to do so, you can fix that and avoid penalty. And then, as pictured here, moving a movable object into place. So this player hit a ball into a tree, which was lodged somewhat higher than he could reach. He thought it was his lucky day. There was a bench nearby. He moved it over to that tree and proceeded to attempt to play that ball. So since he moved that object into that area where he was going to take his stance, he is subject to penalty. However, if the ball happened to just land in that tree, which was over top of that bench, so the bench was already there, he did not move that bench into place. So in that case, it truly is his lucky day, and he could stand on the bench and proceed to play that stroke. We know the areas or the things that we can fix, and now how you may fix those items. You have to restore the original object back to its original position, and the improvement must be eliminated. So you have to, for example, move that boundary stake. If you happen to have your ball that came to rest up against the boundary stake or so close to it that it was going to interfere with your stance, if you pulled that stake up and threw it to the side, now somebody has called it out and said, hey, that you can't do that, that's a penalty, but you may fix it by simply putting that stake back in the same hole. It has to be that same object. It cannot be any other stake. Same thing with the tree branch. If you're able to move it back into place, let's just say, as pictured, this player has bent it in order to get a clear line to the ball or stance to the ball. But in this case, as long as it hasn't been broken or bent too much, I'm sure if she were to move away, that branch would come right back into place. The improvement would be eliminated and avoid penalty in that case. And then last bullet point here, removing the object that was moved back into position. That's pretty simple there. So just noteworthy, if you're reviewing Rule 8, just know that the areas that are things that you can do to improve the conditions affecting the stroke that are able to be fixed and those that are not. So here's our built-in exceptions. So the rule says that you cannot improve any of the conditions affecting the stroke. And then it later goes on to list the allowed actions. So it says allowed actions, but these are basically built-in exceptions to the rule that I just went over. And there's a long list of them. So if you are fairly searching for your ball and doing reasonable things. So a lot of these bullet points associated with reasonable actions. So nothing too extreme. If we see a player as a rules official that's doing way more than is necessary to do any of these things, now we're going to intervene and have to ask a few more questions because it may have gone above and beyond what the rules allow, and we might get into a situation where there is a breach of Rule 8. But if you're fairly searching for your ball, removing movable objects, marking, lifting, replacing the ball, as long as all of those things are done with reasonable actions, even if there is some level of improvement done, because they are listed as exceptions, we are not going to get penalized. Also, for grounding your club lightly, if this were not in there, every time we grounded our club, we would be penalized under Rule 8 because there is a small amount of improvement that is done. Firmly placing feet to take a stance, so that we get into some gray area when we're talking about digging in feet into a bunker. So as long as what's reasonable, so nothing that's going to be done to level out a shot or to dig down so deep to try to test the condition. If we see something that's going on that's a little too extreme, again, we might have to ask that question of what exactly was going on there. If you make a stroke, and which includes the backswing for a stroke, that is one of our exceptions. So if you're into that tree and you take your backswing and you make the follow through and you're ripping out all kinds of leaves and tree branches, as long as you complete that stroke, then you have improved that area of intended swing. But because you made the stroke, that is one of our exceptions. If you take a backswing and you break branches and move leaves and you discontinue that stroke or cancel the stroke and you don't continue, now we have to figure out, well, because you then have to go in and make your stroke the next attempt, have you improved that area by that previous action? We talked about the teeing areas being the most favorable. You're allowed to make improvements in the teeing area. You're allowed to smooth sand in a bunker after playing from it. So sometimes the rules are written in a way that's very literal, and you might have some questions, but sometimes you're just rereading it and taking it for exactly how it's written. So if you are playing from a bunker and you hit the ball out of bounds because the ball has been removed from that bunker and you've played from it, the rules say that even though you have to come back and drop the ball under stroke and distance because it's out of bounds, you are allowed to rake that bunker. So that would be one of our conditions affecting the stroke in that relief area, but this is one of our exceptions. Making improvements on the putting green, that's one of the things that we covered earlier, and then moving a natural object to see if it's loose. This is very rare, but if it's let's say your ball is near a rock or a branch or something that you're not quite sure if it's firmly embedded or attached to the ground, you are allowed to move it to see if it's loose. But if it is deemed to be attached or something that you're not allowed to move, you do have to return it to avoid penalty. Any questions, Amanda?
Yeah, we have a couple here. The first one is about, if your ball is in some trees and you've got some branches around your ball, if you're standing in the tree branches and try to push them behind you so that you have a clear swing for your club, is that okay? And so, no, it's not okay. Under Rule 8.1, those tree branches you're not allowed to, under the CATS, your area of intended swing. So if you move those tree branches, to stand in front of them, as long as you move them back before you make your stroke at the ball, then you're okay. But if you do swing, you do move them out of the way and then continue to make your stroke, you do get that general penalty of 2 strokes. So no, you are not allowed to move tree branches to have a clearer swing. And then also, what if a ball is sitting high in the rough, you address the ball, it moves slightly, then returns to its original position. Okay, is it okay to ground the club lightly, or is it a penalty? Yes, the rules entitle you to ground your club lightly behind the ball, and under the definition of moved in the rules of golf, if the ball, slightly wiggles or oscillates and then comes back to its original position, it has not moved, and that includes going up or down. So if you lightly ground your club behind the ball and it moves just a little bit, but it's still in its original position, that is okay. There is no penalty there. And that is all we have right now, Josh.
Okay, great, thanks. So now we're going to move into ball handling. So we covered the principles, and I touched on them here today of playing the course as you find it and playing the ball as it lies. If we can do both of those things all the time, we don't need Rule 14, but as we know, golf is a difficult game, and even if you play the hole as it's intended, it's very hard to get through a round and even a hole without touching your ball between the time you make the first stroke and your last for that hole. So we need Rule 14, which Rule 14 is one of the larger rules in the Rules of Golf book. We could probably spend at least an hour, if not more, just covering Rule 14. So we're going to cover really the basics, and then if you have any questions that we haven't covered, please send them to us after the presentation, either by website submission or phone call. So first, marking, lifting, and replacing the ball. First, the definition of what does it mean to mark the ball? It's to show the spot where the ball is at rest by placing a ball marker, which that's another defined term. Ball marker is an artificial object. It cannot be something that's either already on the putting green or a natural object such as a leaf or something that you happen to find. It has to be an artificial object such as a small coin, can be a club, a tee, etc. And the main purpose of this definition is to say you have to mark it somehow right next to the ball, could be behind, next to, in front of. The main part is marking it accurately and getting it right back to that same exact place, because the reason why we are marking a ball is because it has to be replaced. All other rules that do not require the ball to be replaced on that spot, such as if you're taking relief from a certain condition, you do not have to mark that ball, because if you're taking relief, the ball is not going back to where it was originally at rest. Although it might be a good practice to do so, just to have some kind of reference to where the original ball was, especially when trying to determine the nearest point of relief or something like that. Could be good practice, but the rules only require you to mark the ball if that ball has to go back on that spot, because that's where the rules say you have to play from. If you do anything that contradicts this part of the rule, so if you lift the ball without marking the spot, mark it in some way that's not permitted, or even make a stroke with the ball marker left in place, these are all procedural penalties, and you're only going to get one penalty stroke. You couldn't mess up just one of these or mess up all of them. You're only going to get one penalty stroke for that one situation. But now replacing the ball, because the rule says when we're marking the ball, it is going to be replaced on that ball on that spot. So I've mentioned that ball, which means the original ball. There are some exceptions, and most of these are obvious. Let's say somebody, which is an outside agency, comes and picks up your ball and runs away with it. So the rules say that the original ball has to be replaced on that spot, but because you no longer have the ball, you can substitute a ball. So these exceptions are somewhat obvious, and the ball must be replaced by the player or person who lifted the ball or caused it to move. So if a spectator does cause the ball to move, that person could replace the ball for you. You could obviously do it yourself. So those are the two people that can replace the ball when it has been lifted, marked lifted, and must be replaced. Now talking about cleaning the golf ball. So under the rules on the putting green, you can always mark, lift, and clean your ball. There's no exceptions there to how many times you're able to do that. You can always do it. And anywhere else on the golf course, we can make the statement of anytime the ball is in your hand, you can clean it, except, here's another exception. It's hard to get through any of our rules without some exceptions. So these things, to see if it's cut or cracked, to identify it because it interferes with play or to see if it lies in the condition where relief is allowed. So an example of this might be to see if it's embedded. So you are permitted to free relief in some situations for an embedded ball. Let's say it's in the general area. You're not quite sure if the ball is embedded. You are permitted to mark and lift that ball, but you cannot clean it. If you do clean the ball when you're not allowed to, it is a 1 penalty stroke. So going back to the general statement of anytime that your ball is in your hand with these exceptions, you are allowed to clean it. So let's say that your ball is in the fairway, it's covered with mud, but we are playing the ball down that day. If you happen to accidentally move it for whatever reason, you are going to get a penalty stroke, and the rules say you do have to replace that ball. However, your ball is now in your hand. It's not under one of these exceptions, so you've already paid your 1 penalty stroke. Now you might as well take advantage of it and clean all the mud off. You're not going to get any additional penalty in that case because it's not specific to one of these exceptions. That was kind of a quicker section, but any questions, Amanda?
No questions at this time.
Okay, so we're going to move into dropping the ball and the procedure on how you have to get a ball back into play when you are dropping. So we're going to talk about how you must do the procedure the right way in order to have done a, quote, right way drop. So if you hear me say right way drop, these 5 things must be accomplished to be considered a right way drop. If it's a wrong way drop, let's say you mess up one or more of these things when trying to drop the ball, then you're going to have unlimited chances to get that right. If you drop the ball in the right way and it rolls outside the relief area, we'll see what to do in that case. But wrong way drops, you have to correct it, or you might be penalized 1 or 2 strokes or lost a hole. You do have the opportunity to do so, and that goes for a lot of the relief procedures or times that you're replacing the ball or doing something with the ball. If you do it incorrectly and you haven't made your next stroke, you're going to be able to correct that mistake. So just because you've done something wrong, let's say that when trying to replace the ball, this would also fall into that. Let's say you have somebody else replace it, but that is not permitted, somebody else that's not permitted. You can correct that mistake by either having the person who moved it or yourself as the player replace that ball to kind of erase that penalty and start over because we haven't made that stroke. So I mentioned the 5 checklist items. So the player must drop the ball. The ball must be dropped straight down from knee height without touching the player or the equipment on the way down. So I'll emphasize that because if the ball does happen to touch let's say you've marked your club length and you've left your club there, the ball strikes the club on the way down, that is a wrong way drop, so you have to correct it. If you drop the ball and it strikes the relief area first, which is the right way, but then it rolls and deflects off your foot, a club, something else, that is going to still be considered a right way drop as long as it stays in the relief area and you haven't done whatever action that is on purpose. So you haven't set a club down there on purpose to stop the ball to get it in a specific lie or anything like that. So if it's all by accident, then you're fine. But that's after the ball has already struck the ground in the relief area. And then, of course, once we have our relief area, the ball has to strike a part of the course in the relief area. There is one new wrinkle to the rules in 2023, which Amanda covered last week. If you are taking back on the line relief, the ball has to first strike a part of the course on that line, which in that point, the relief area is established. So I've mentioned knee height a couple times, and this basically means if you're standing upright, there's an imaginary dotted line, which is pictured on our slide here. That line stays there, and then no matter what method you choose to get to that knee height, whether it's just simply bending over to get to it or kneeling down, the rules just say it has to be dropped from knee height while standing. So just imagine that line staying there. As long as you get to it every time you're dropping the ball, then you're going to be fine. Also on the left-hand side, the player may be either inside or outside the relief area when dropping the ball, so there's no requirement on whether you have to stand inside or outside. The main thing is getting it into that relief area and checking all 5 of those boxes to have a right way drop. So if we drop the ball in the right way, so we've done everything that we're supposed to do. However, the ball rolls outside of the relief area. Now the rules are going to say we drop the ball in the right way again, and then if it happens again, we're going to place the ball on where the ball struck a part of the course in that relief area the second time, or on the line in that case. When we're dropping a ball or placing a ball, so not replacing. So replacing means that ball on that spot. If we're dropping a ball or placing it, which means just going back to the last slide where the ball hasn't found a home yet because it rolls outside the relief area twice. Now we're going to place a ball. The rule says you can drop any ball, which is a change from for the 2019, of course, into 2023 as well. Beforehand, there used to be times where you still had to keep that same ball in play. Any questions on those procedures, Amanda?
Yeah, we've got one. So what if I'm going to mark my ball on the putting green and I accidentally drop my ball marker and it causes my ball to move? Under rule 9.4, that's on the putting green, that's okay. That's one of those exceptions. Accidental movement on the putting green. You just have to replace the ball in its original spot before you mark it, and you're good to go there. So, and that's it.
All right, now we're going to jump into Rule 9. As I mentioned before, we're covering lots of meaty rules today and lots of important ones, which are going to set us up for the next 2 sessions where we talk about taking relief as well. So here's another definition, another one such as the improved definition, like I mentioned earlier, of what it actually means to have a ball moved. So the Webster's version means that if it moves or you see it move, then of course the ball has moved, right? But the rules of golf are going to say that the ball has to actually leave its original spot and come to rest on another spot somewhere else. So the ball can wobble or oscillate. It can actually move, an inch or so, as long as it comes right back to the same exact spot. By the definition of moved in the rules of golf, the ball has not moved because it's still on its original spot. So that's something to keep in mind. And also, it could mean up, down, or horizontally. So this ball pictured in the rough is sitting up very nicely for us. However, if we or somebody does something to cause that ball to move, which could mean straight down, now it's buried in the rough. Now we have to see what the rules are going to tell us to do. This is just an explanation of what we just covered on what it means to move. So another definition, I mentioned there would be quite a few of these today, of what it means to be known or virtually certain. So this would apply for, has the ball actually moved? And also we get to penalty areas, whether or not your ball is in a penalty area. So the first one's very obvious. If you know it has moved, meaning somebody saw it, you saw it, that means the ball has moved because it was witnessed, and you do have to replace it or apply the rules. But also if you're just not quite sure. So a lot of times this applies more to the penalty area rule than this one. But the 95% standard. So maybe there's a little bit of doubt. Is my ball in the penalty area? Is it not? Did it move? Did it not? As long as you're 95% certain, so that goes to virtually certain, then we can apply these rules. So the rules say that there are 4 possible causes for what may have caused our ball to move. And we'll go through each of these 4, but the natural forces, wind, water, gravity, the player and an opponent. So they can, both of these are basically saying the player's side. So anybody that's on my side counts as the player. So it could be my caddy, my partner's caddy. Same thing for the opponent. So anybody on my opponent's side. So it could be the opponent's caddy, or if we're playing 4-ball or foursomes, It could be their partner and their caddy, so anybody on that side. That's what this the number 3 is including. And then outside influence, it could be another player in stroke play, or basically anything else that is not one of the first 3. So what to do? So if natural forces cause our ball to move, there are 2 exceptions. One of which Amanda covered as a new 2023 part of the rule. It's the Ricky Fowler exception. So we've taken relief from a penalty area. We've done everything properly. The ball is at rest, so we're ready to play our next stroke, but then the ball begins to move and it goes back into the penalty area. That is one of our new exceptions on the rules. Are going to say, because my ball was at rest, I had taken relief, so I had dropped it, placed it, and it rolled away and it changed locations on the golf course. So it went from general area to the penalty area. The rules are going to say that I put it back and I don't get double penalized in that case. The other exception here is on the putting green. So putting green being one of the more favorable. If, let's say, you have a ball that's on a slope and you have not marked and lifted the ball. So the ball is just sitting there. If natural forces cause the ball to move, the rules at that point is going to say that I play it from its new position. So if the ball is sitting on a slope and the slope is going towards the hole, you may choose not to mark it, because we'll talk about in a second, once you mark the ball, now things completely change. However, if the slope is going away from the hole or to a less favorable outcome, then you want to run up there and mark that ball as soon as you can, because this exception applies on the putting green only. Once I mark my ball and lift it, now my ball owns that spot on the putting green, and once I put it back, that's where I'm going to play from, and with no exceptions. So if the natural forces at that point cause my ball to move, I'm going to put it back on that spot because I've already marked and lifted the ball. So moving on to the player. If you cause your ball to move as the player, you are going to get 1 penalty stroke with 5 exceptions. So we're going to go through these separately because there are quite a bit, and also they're going to apply to our opponent next. So if you are allowed to lift your ball for any reason under the rules, let's say you're trying to identify it, or another rule that it does allow you to lift your ball, you're not going to get penalized there, obviously. Accidental movement in trying to find or identify the ball, that's another one of those cases where it's whatever's reasonable in trying to search or find or identify that ball. Accidental movement on the putting green, we covered that already. Accidental movement anywhere except the putting green while trying to apply a rule. So let's say I do still have a ball in play, so I haven't done anything with it yet, but I'm trying to determine, if I do take relief, let's say from an unplayable ball, or using the unplayable ball rule, if I'm trying to apply that rule, then, and if I'm measuring where my 2 club links might get me to, if I accidentally move my ball in that case, because I'm trying to apply the rule, trying to measure, that's going to be a case where I don't get a penalty for that. And if the ball moves after coming to rest against the player or equipment, then that's not a case where we're going to get penalized either. So moving on to the opponent. So that's our third category of what can cause our ball to move. If our opponent does something deliberately to move our ball, then the opponent is going to receive that 1 penalty stroke, and that opponent may replace the ball, or we talked about earlier, you as the player may replace it with the 3 exceptions. So the first 2 are having to deal with just things that could commonly happen. So because it says opponent, we know we're in match play. So in match play, there's the opportunity to concede strokes. So if my ball is at rest on the putting green and my opponent's going to concede that next stroke, that my opponent can pick up the ball that's still in play and at rest and throw it back to me. But because it's by conceding that stroke, there's no penalty there. And also on the putting green, if my opponent just by mistake walks up to my ball, marks it and lifts it by mistake, that's one of our exceptions to where the rules are not going to penalize the player or the opponent in that case. And then our third exception actually refers back to these exceptions where the player would avoid penalty. So with the exception of that first bullet point, The remaining 4 are times where if my opponent is doing something, doing one of these 4 bullet points, and it moves my ball, then my opponent will not get a penalty stroke applied. And then lastly, outside influence, there's no penalty to anybody, and then the ball must simply be replaced on the original spot. Any questions now, Amanda? That's our last slide for today. So any questions on either this section or any previous sections that we've covered?
Yeah, we've got a couple. The first one asking about when you're trying to find a ball in some deep rough. If you or someone playing with you looking for a ball in the rough and the ball gets stepped on, do they get to move the ball back to the original spot at rest? Yes, you do. Under Rule 8.1b, you are taking, reasonable actions and fairly searching for a ball. So if it does get stepped on while you're searching for it, you can remove it. You can replace it to its original spot. And then what happens if a bird flies away with your ball? So obviously this is an outside influence taking your ball. So what you would do is, if you know the original spot, just replace the ball on that original spot. If you do not know the original spot, estimate as close as you can and then place a ball in that spot and continue on with play. Those are all the questions I have right now, but I think, I'll stay on for a couple minutes. If anybody else has any other questions, I'll be here to answer them. But
all right, some good questions. And the last one about the bird flying away from the ball. So during the state open one year, that actually happened to me. I was assigned to a group of holes, and an eagle came down, or a hawk came down and picked up a ball out of the fairway and flew off with it. I'd been waiting there for hours for a ruling, trying not to fall asleep, and I finally had something to do. And actually my boss, Matt Smiley, who many of you probably know, came out of nowhere and stole that ruling from me. So that's a funny story that we joke about a lot, but that actually happened to me as a rules official. So just a preview for next week for those that are going to go to the 101 and review. If you want to review Rule 15 and 16, we're going to talk about all the free relief scenarios under those rules. And then to wrap things up, the week after, we're going to go into our penalty relief situations. So we appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Like Amanda mentioned, we will hang out for a few minutes. If you want to submit a question, we'll be glad to type an answer to you. If not, you can always email through our website, call us. We're available to help out whenever we can. So we appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.